Well, they do say that politicians aren't probably the most popular sorts of people, particularly around election campaigns. But to meet Kenneth Dunstan Elder Travers, I hope I've got your name right, we call him Ken here on the couch. You're going to change your mind. He's one of the nicest blokes we've had on the couch. How are you going?
Oh, I'm good, Candice, and thanks for that introduction.
He didn't pay me, by the way, but that's fine. So some good news and bad news since we last saw you. In Western Australia, as Fred mentioned, we have had an election, and you've kept your seat in the upper house in the Legislative Council. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's always, every election, it's a great honour to be re-elected as a Member of Parliament and to represent the people. On the other side, of course, I had the disappointment that my team lost, but there's 4 years' time we'll have to get to play the grand final again. So
that's it. So 16 years in the chair now, thereabouts.
Yeah, no, and people often ask me, where it all went, and I can't tell you. In fact, I was looking at Facebook the other day, and one of my electorate officers, her daughter was 8, going off to spend her 18th in Melbourne, and she was only a little baby when she worked for me. So, it's pretty scary when you see things like that and how the world's changed in that time.
Well, speaking of that, you have seen some pretty full-on events throughout your career, throughout your political career, including 9/11, for example, the SARS epidemic, the fall of Ansett. What are some of the main issues that have affected your career to date?
Oh, wow. That's a long question because there's lots of things. I mean, all of those events, I was the Parliamentary Secretary for Tourism and taking a very active role in the tourism portfolio. So they then affected the West Australian community. So I was sort of given the job of the crisis management, the response to each of those tasks. And that was a real challenge.
Don't envy you that.
No, because the West Australian tourism industry, they're doing it tough again, but they were really hit by a lot, the SARS. And I mean, I remember having to, I know this sounds weird, everyone thinks politicians go on trips all the time. I was sent to go to a conference in Bali because the tourism industry wanted to show that it was safe to travel to Southeast Asia and for people to be travelling again because no one was travelling around the world. And they came to us and said, look, can you send either the Minister or the Parliamentary Secretary? So I spent 3 days, which sounds fantastic in Bali.
Doesn't sound terrible.
No, but except I was cooped up in a hotel room for the whole time, and it was not long after the Bali bombing, so it was pretty emotional in that regard, going out to Ground Zero and all of those sort of things, or the site, the Sari Club, and yeah. So, but the main thing was working with the industry to work out how you actually get people going. We had a big sale. We did a sort of a state sale of West Australian tourism product to get the industry moving again. So we became very good at crisis management during that time. There's been a lot of other great things. I mean, when we were elected in 2001, saving the old growth forests was a really significant issue. There's a native title. It's hard to remember back, 10 years ago, the Liberals in this state were opposing native title. Now, thankfully, everyone supports it and we're moving forward and constantly getting new settlements and getting those things resolved. And I think getting a real, true sense of reconciliation with the Indigenous communities of Western Australia.
Well, you did pretty well considering I put you on the spot. And taking a look back to the election campaign, and one of the major things that I certainly associated you with as a punter and as a voter and as a swing voter was Metronet being the shadow spokesperson for transport. Whose brainchild was Metronet?
I wish I'd be able to claim all of it for myself. I mean, it was a process that I worked with a range of people and that was what was developed out of those communications. There was transport people, planners, even communications people about how you actually put all of that together. And that's what we came up with Metronet. And the reality is, although we've lost the election, I'm confident that Metronet, or significant parts of it, will survive because it needs to be done. I mean, and it's easy to actually build a policy when it's actually, it's what we need for the state.
For our non-WA viewers, we've just found out that Perth has now surpassed its urban sprawl, the urban sprawl of Tokyo and Los Angeles. So with a relatively small population compared to those places, we are remarkably spread out. If there was one thing that Perth needs to solve this congestion crisis that we have, if you had one project you could fund, what would it be?
Wow. I don't know that there is one. I think it is about having
I'm making you have one.
that plan. Look, if I could only build one element of MetroNet, I think probably the first thing I would have done is the North Circle route, to try and capture all of that growth in the north and northeastern corridors of Perth, to capture that and to bring it in by rail rather than by road. And because even the government's proposal for a light rail system heading into the north central corridor, as they call it, will still be an on-road solution, not an off-road solution, which MetroNet was.
Being from the northern suburbs of Perth, up in that northern sprawl kind of area, how's the commute for you?
Well, luckily, I live in the southern part of my electorate and have my office in the northern part, so I get to go against the flow. And that's something we've got to encourage too, is that people, you know, get places like Joondalup as an employment centre far greater being used. And so, I mean, the government's committed to putting a new government office out there. I think that's fantastic. Well done. Just want to see it happen. We need to get more private sector employers out in, and not just Joondalup, in Rockingham, Coburn, Midland, Ellenbrook, Armidale. You know, we've got some great town centres. Morley's another one. Great town centres where if we could build them and get them as centres of employment to take the pressure off the CBD, that would go a long way to solving the congestion crisis. Because if you go and look at the freeway system, it's always, you know, in the mornings it's busy in one direction only.
That's it. And going back to the election and speaking of communication and congestion and all those things, a lot of your policies kind of were revealed in a bit of a new and innovative way this campaign, with Twitter and social media taking a bit more of a bigger picture, helping you put your messages out there to more people than ever. And certainly you were one of the most prolific, or if not the most prolific politician or candidate in when it came to tweeting. How did it affect your campaign?
Look, I think it was a new tool. I still don't know that it's got into the mainstream, but it was certainly driving people towards our website and our Facebook pages, and they are going to become increasingly the case. I mean, I think if we look at US politics now, that sort of electronic media, social media has now become a really crucial part of not just the campaigning, the fundraising, and the way in which it operates. I mean, there's some negative sides to it as well, Candice.
Indeed.
You know, in terms of, we saw some trolls out there, and I think that was clearly linked to political parties, and I think that was not a good thing for democracy. The anonymous trolls, I mean.
There was some vile language. When I was following some of the feeds that you put through, and some of the anonymous from a lot of different sides of politics, but it was, as you say, the people who aren't willing to put their names to things, using horrid language, getting a little bit too personal, but sometimes people are putting their name to that, including some other politicians. Yeah. How does it feel when it does get that almost that schoolyard rabble kind of vibe to politics? Oh,
look, I just took the position of ignoring those where they weren't real. I mean, there were some Liberal people that were happy to have a robust debate with me, and I was always happy to engage with them. There was a couple in particular that I regularly had robust engagement with on Twitter. Those where they were anonymous, I just refused to engage with them. I mean, and I do think it's a really interesting issue that I think the Parliament needs to look at, is how are we going to deal with that sort of anonymous trolling on social media where people aren't putting their name to it. You know, if you put out a leaflet, you've got to authorise it and put your name to it, and I think we're going to have to look at how do we deal with that in terms of the social media as we go forward. You were telling me before, you know, you're quite happy to engage with people, Liberal, Labor, Green, whatever political persuasion, but it's even more refreshing when they're quite happy to, when they see you in person, come up and shake your hand and say, yes, we agree to disagree. Yeah. But I'm going to tell you what I think of you. Oh no, absolutely. And in fact, one of the people I regularly engage with is a young Liberal, and he actually came. We were both at the leaders' debate, and he came over and introduced himself to me. I wouldn't have picked him from his picture, I've got to be honest, but he came and introduced himself to me, and we had a conversation at the leaders' debate. And that's great. I think that's a positive part of democracy, and that's something that Twitter, I think, helps with. But when you get people operating anonymously and getting into really quite disgusting behaviour, and you know, I hope that it's not linked to any political party. I mean, certainly if I ever found out that the Labor Party was doing in an organised way anything like that, I would be absolutely disgusted and disown it and take it up. I'm not aware of us having done that, but there was certainly, I think, some of the other political parties, you know, there were certainly suggestions by their people that may have been the case.
We'll give you a quick plug for your Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
It's Ken Travers MLC, so just at Ken Travers MLC. Pretty easy to follow, really.
Absolutely, and it's also easy to catch up with us on the website, thecouch.com.au. You can catch this interview all over again. The details are at the bottom of your screen. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you, Candice, and thank you again to Ken Travers. Just a quick one for Ken before we go to break. I know we're right out of time. Ken, if you could give advice to the Labor Party mechanism about the federal election coming up, how would you tell them to promote themselves? How would they change to win the election?
Look, I think they've just got to get united, stay focused, stay positive. I mean, you know, the other week they increased the pension, introduced legislation for NDIS and apologised to adoptees. I mean, they were really
great policies that
got lost because of their internal machinations. Focus on the big issue, focus on the policies, and hopefully people will see that they actually have a positive agenda.